That's all the H's I received today, all the KHs I received today, beautiful community. Let me know if you can hear me. And welcome to this conversation about the implosive breakup between Donald Trump and Elon Musk and whatever else we want to briefly talk about. That was too loud, beautiful community. I have been in hospital for 3 weeks. And during the first week in the first hospital, it wasn't even clear that I was going to make it. That's how sick I was. Unfortunately, having been 3 weeks at home, now I am still very sick. I can't properly sit up and I can't stand for even a fraction of a second. So, we're doing the most horizontal type of life we've ever done. And I heard that horizontal lives are among the coolest lives you can do, especially if you've got some Specsaver spectacles you received in the post, and both of which look completely ridiculous. You've got to vote on which one is better. So, how are we gonna ground ourselves? Well, we won't talk about my health unless you ask, because on the Vladimir Diary channel and on the community post area here on the YouTube channels, I give little updates. And therefore, we're going to talk politics. So, what I think it's important to say, big picture, beautiful community, is that Musk and Trump both have what Shakespeare would have called, although not at all in that language, an ethically inadequate relationship with power. They're ethically inadequate in their relationship with power in different ways, but their relationships with power are farcically inadequate in the way that fundamentally disrespects ordinary citizens like you, because they are interacting with precious and sacred things, your political institutions, on which anything you want to get done outside of your private life, and sometimes in your private life, depends. And they're toying with them for purposes of self-advancement. In Trump's case, in Musk's case, for purposes of self-advancement / naive sincerity of a dogmatic and self-deceptive kind. What else is a big truth we might see above, beautiful community? It's that, unfortunately, it's not a crazy person. A lot of crazy people at the moment because the world's crazy and people are feeling like they're losing the plot. But it's not a crazy person who says that arguably today the United States is the greatest source of geopolitical uncertainty on this planet, on which clever animals like us live, which did invent some interesting political institutions of which we must be very proud, but institutions that work in a fragile manner within nation states and global institutions that work very poorly indeed. So the United States is an extraordinary source of geopolitical uncertainty, and that's what you feel if you're an ally of the United States right now. You're feeling, woo, what is going on there? And if you're an enemy of the United States, what is going on is so woo that you might be thinking that it's not just the case that your enemy is having a delightfully wonky time, but that your enemy is transforming so fast, it might become an ally soon. That's the sort of thing that might be thought in the Kremlin. Now, in the Kremlin, they are still quite skeptical of whether Trump will stay soft on Putin. Funnily enough, they are more paranoid about that than Western commentators often allow. Now, what is Trump's strategy today? We're going to take a couple of questions that were left at the beginning, and then we'll engage with all of us here. Trump's strategy is a strategy he can't properly fulfill because he can't do strategy because of two reasons. Number one, he's too impulsive. And number two, he can't do, sorry about this weird symbol, he can't do collective action. He can't take advice and, in a collegiate way, put together a plan. But if he could, his plan is destroy Musk's reputation, but don't engage too much in direct conflict between himself and Musk. Surf, hello. Now, it's going to be difficult for Trump not to engage in the tit for tat conflict. For Trump to not engage in the tit for tat conflict with Musk, but his strategy is not to do that, just to have Musk's reputation maximally damaged by other means. Now, how have we got there apart from all the clever political analysis? Hello, lovely Anne. How have we got here apart from all the clever political analysis that you've heard from many good platforms about this? Well, big picture, we've got here, partly for the reason we just mentioned. On Trump's side, it's that Trump's project is rudderless. And the biggest illustration of this are the tariffs. Trump wasn't able to take advice on the tariffs and form a picture of the plausible outcome that would ensue. Therefore, it's not just that there was a kind of a crazy vision about how this might work. There wasn't a picture that was agreed upon of how it might work at all. So Trump is permanently in the kind of strategic vacuum. And over and above that, for Trump, insofar as he does have a strategy, the strategy is to maximize drama. That was the problem Trump brought to the equation. The problem Musk brought to the equation is a spectacular excess of confidence in things at which he's actually horrendously bad, like politics. Musk is not just bad at political issues. I mean, literally worse than a random 16-year-old we could pull off the street often. He is bad at politics generally. He has a kind of village philosopher attitude to politics, which makes him feel that he can solve complex problems which are in fact not solvable in politics. It makes him feel that if only he got rid of malign and irrational actors in politics, he could basically bring it about that a society were run rationally. And that misses out all the conflict, all the density, all the individual motivation, all the institutional complexity, all the sort of endless dynamics of stasis in politics. Musk's relationship with politics misses out on nearly all the materials of politics. If you say, what is politics? In the best descriptions of it, from Thucydides to Machiavelli, Musk misunderstands nearly all of it while being convinced that he understands it better than most others. And so that dynamic meant that there was going to be an implosion. And Musk, for reasons not just of his neurodiversity, but how his neurodiversity sits in him, finds it nearly impossible to be conciliatory once a crack appears in the relationship. For Musk, once a crack appears in the relationship, he must destroy that relationship, no matter what it is that's in his own best interests. It's virtually impulsively irresistible for Musk, right? Once a crack appears, he's got to break the whole thing, and holding back is really hard. Andrew Parker, Dunning-Kruger effect, certainly it's a version of Dunning-Kruger, because Musk, you might say, has elements of visionary brilliance as an entrepreneur, right? But that just does not translate into the majority of life. Beautiful friend and supporter of the channel, and one of my favorite YouTubers, Adam Ragusia, asks, I'm going to take a couple of questions now that were left at the start. Vlad, do you think the self-sabotage of Trumpism might effectively immunize the United States against future authoritarian turns in the way the Cromwellian experience may have immunized Britain for a time? Now, what I love about the question is that important in transitional times like this to think not just of recent history, but history in general. So I think it's always helpful to make comparisons like this. I think the cartoonish answer must be that back then it was possible for elites to converge on a legitimating story for the state, for the government. And today, polarization of a post-truth kind prevents elites from converging in this way, which is a very painful problem. And the problem is that we've got roughly two camps of elites. We've got technocratic centrist elites that half know that their politics has sort of gone extinct, but they're still trying to practice it. And a few of them are beginning to turn on the spot and try to reform technocratic centrism from within. AOC has been doing some of this recently. The other camp we've got are entrepreneurial or post-truth or destructive political actors who are basically anti-constitutional. They want to break institutions. And these are the two rough camps we're dealing with. So what's the best way we can get close to a positive answer to Adam's question? It's if a new political project is proposed that galvanizes, right, the United States civically and engages people in a shared narrative who currently can't even share a fact, let alone a mental world together. The best materials for such a transformation lie with the story that something went very, very wrong with post-World War II liberalism. That post-World War II liberalism wasn't liberatory enough, that it settled too much for magical ideology about free markets, especially from the 1970s on, in a way that increasingly left some of the biggest concerns of citizens unanswered. So you've got to offer a new political project that has to have far greater liberatory credentials than anything technocratic centrism offers. You've got to apologize and make up to people for this feeling that a kind of hyper-globalization project took place in the 80s and 90s, which not only didn't go that well, but actually was done without populations feeling they were properly consulted. And you've got to take serious responsibility for what technocratic centrism has done, not just to exclude people, but to encourage people to lose trust in institutions. But there's also got to be a positive policy agenda. And in my view, there's a wonderful book out called Abundance now that most of you have heard about. And I would say that such a project would need to go further than Abundance goes, actually, to tell a story of what it means for a citizen of the United States to lead a decent life with a decent dignity of work available to them, and a capacity to feel patriotic about one's country, in part because you feel economically included. There needs to be really a very big enterprise of economic democratization. So this is just a loose sketch. That's how we get closer to learning from Trumpism. Are we on course for that now? No. But nothing is impossible. I mean, as we often say, it was overwhelmingly likely that something like Putin happened to Russia after the 1990s, but it wasn't inevitable. It could have been otherwise. And some would even argue that Putin could have been kicked out of power around the time that Medvedev was in office. So it's very important to not be fatalistic and to say that if there is a 5% chance of something, we can turn it into a 25% chance. Now, what we can be confident about, in my view, is that Trumpism will implode, not just because of Trump himself, but because of various incoherences in the project as a whole. And part of what the Musk-Trump split is illustrating is a kind of tension between the techno-utopian element of Trumpism and a kind of nationalist, populist element of Trumpism. Now, will we learn from Trump in the United States and perhaps elsewhere too? In the UK, will we learn from Boris Johnson, one might say, in a way that immunizes us from future authoritarian turns? No. Unfortunately, the likely outcome, it's in our power to do something about it, but the likely outcome is that we're going to be facing bigger challenges to our democratic institutions than Trump poses, more skillful challenges. And the hope is that that will encourage us to resist these challenges more skillfully. But that means a very, very big transformation among both participants, but also citizen supporters of what I have labeled technocratic centrist politics, which covers for me a very wide gamut, right? From Barack Obama to pretty much the recent Republican presidents, too. Paoli is saying, what new form will post-truth populist / potato chip billionaire alliance take? By potato chip, we typically mean social media. Call the owners of social media platforms potato chip companies simply because I don't distinguish the political legitimacy that Google has over our speech from political legitimacy a potato chip company has over our speech. We don't know, is the answer, but we have got a crisis of an extraordinary kind of seepage of what should normally be state capacity into private hands. And that's a very, 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 very big concern. And you can't fix it until you reconstitute trust in institutions to some extent, which is a very, very difficult enterprise. And Pauli, you go on to say, I have no idea what to think about our post-truth populists being in an open war with our potato chip companies. I suppose one positive thought here, right, that somebody in Hungary can be envious of, is that there is still a degree of pluralism. And that's an important thought in two ways. One, it's much better when malign political forces constitutively conflict than if they all gather up together. Two, the degree of institutional conflict in the United States is still deep enough for it to be wrong to call the United States an illiberal democracy or an authoritarian post-democratic society. And the reason this is so important isn't so sociological, it's practical. When you overstate an F-word, fascism type description of the Trump administration, it tends to paralyze people. It tends to give you the impression that there's nothing much you can do except maybe move to Canada. And by the way, we'll have a conversation about the 2 or 3 academics that moving. It's quite an interesting topic, including Tim Snyder, who seems to be mostly moved for his partner than for himself. Now, You are in America still. American citizens, you're still in America. And that's very important. You're not in some kind of fascist authoritarian society. Now, and for the next few years, bonking, misbehaving authoritarians on the nose will be effective. You can push them back. One thing you can learn from, sorry, I'm giving such a soapbox rather than analytical answer to your question, Pauli, and maybe even drifting away from it. But what we can learn from the Russian experience is how readily and how rapidly pluralistic oppositional political forces conceded to Putinism. They conceded along several dimensions prematurely. There's no point playing games you can't win. That's important too. But the human tendency overwhelmingly, and let's give some credit to Tim Snyder here, is to comply prematurely because you're overwhelmed by a power that is actually a lot less definite than it seems to you to be to be. Now, how is it all going? Let me bespectacle myself and have a look at the chat situation. How did Medvedev see his role while president? I think that drifts us a bit to Russian politics, but the brief answer is that Medvedev oscillated between a kind of gray, the possibility that he could drift independently and create a space between himself and Putin, and eventually the realization that no such thing would be possible. My small remark here, don't underestimate how far that is a matter of character. An exceptional historical character would have kept Putin out of office in Medvedev's place. There is a sense in which this was both an expression of Medvedev's character, but also an expression of Medvedev's character under pressure from Putin's character. There's a sense in which Putin broke Medvedev. There's even a tiny video on the main channel, which I've labeled Why Putin Broke Medvedev. Let us have a look at where we are. Suzanne, so great to see you because we haven't done a live in several months, and we are genius practitioners of the horizontal, the nearly horizontal live. Let's see what kind of questions we are asking. T Zeiss TV is saying, look, should Europe take advantage of this US discord and frailty? The answer is the Europeans are even more discordant than the United States because they're a series of states who can't agree with each other on much. And they're also a series of blocs who take different views on key geopolitical questions. For example, to East European states, Putin's invasion of Ukraine is existential. To West European states, it is simply not. There's no argument to say it should be, but it's just simply not. That's not how they respond. So it's certainly an opportunity for Europe, but it's very difficult for Europe to take that opportunity because Trumpism is not an American problem in many ways. It's a global problem. It's part of a global ideology, of which, funnily enough, Putinism is itself an extreme example, which is why Putinism is a Russian problem and in many ways also not a Russian problem. So Europe has the same ideological wash coming over it, and you can see right now that it's their populist, exploitative reform party that's leading in the polls in the UK, where I am. And all over and above that, Europe is stuck in a very impressive but also very sclerotic bureaucracy that is the European Union that makes it very difficult for things to move. Will Starmer's acceptance of the multicultural project having failed and seemingly serious commitment to ending mass immigration do much to tamp down populist sentiment in the UK or further fuel it? Now, that's an important question because it's a question that's really being asked of all of our democracies. I don't think it is Keir Starmer's position at all that the multicultural project has failed. But it is Keir Starmer's position that if enough citizens feel aggrieved about the immigration situation, their feelings need to be taken seriously. The question is, what can the government do about this? So far, um, the Starmer government has been full of people I happen to quite like personally. Even some of the unpopular members of the Starmer government I like personally. But their politics and their conduct in politics is passive, defensive, and reactive rather than proactive. On policy after policy, this is a government that fails to take the lead, that plays defense rather than offense, and that often is so unconfident it doesn't properly get on top of the issues at hand, often making sort of mistakes, even in the factual understanding of key issues. Not for a post-truth reason, but for the reason of not sitting down seriously and saying, we are going to sort issue X out. Because often the starting point for the Labour government in the UK is, oh my God, we are assailed around this issue. How do we respond? And so that is a neurotic loop into which technocratic centrism falls. And it's a kind of a loop of self-immolation, despite the good intent. So this government has been spectacularly practically incompetent, in my view. Not because people in it are badly intentioned or manipulative. There's a lot of people in it I really like. The single biggest piece of advice I have for this government is, for goodness sake, be more courageous, because you're going to lose. The thing that we need to understand around the issue of immigration is that it's only going to get worse as the climate crisis intensifies. And the degree to which this issue is going to be exploited by malign political forces is only going to grow. So we're going to need to get very, very serious about how to balance taking policy stances that are not too cruel and not too brutal, taking policy stances that meet the economic needs of the country for migration, with realizing that if you have citizens who don't feel that their country has a stable border, you're going to just lose your democracy. And that has really terribly brutal human rights type consequences. I mean, it means cracking down very, very hard on what's called illegal migration, for instance. So this is a very difficult, very painful issue, where there's quite frankly just a conflict between what you need to do to sustain your democracy and build trust, and what you need to do to protect what in the 1990s we would have called human rights. Suzanne, thank you. Daniel, I've heard of the Notwithstanding Clause in Canada, but I'm not going to comment on it in case there is something I'm missing. I'm happy to retake that question in a more generic form, but especially in a period of great crisis of trust, I think people like me needs to be more sort of economical about staying in one's lane. how much can the manner in which Elon is disposed of send to the sidelines? Dominic is asking, tell us about the state of authoritarianism in America. A lot, a lot. You're not going to see a situation, although it's not inconceivable further down the line, but you're highly unlikely to see a situation right now whereby Elon is taken away in the middle of the night, the way he certainly would be in Belarus. So you can absolutely judge, right, where you're at with a slide toward authoritarianism by how enemies of the folks in power are treated. What are the ways in which they're going to be attacked and ostracized? But don't underestimate just how much power Musk himself has. Trump has more power, but don't underestimate how much power Musk himself has. More power than many countries. Time Trader, you're asking a great question about population decline and how that's used by the child-free movement and how that's exploited by populists. I'm going to talk about it, I promise, because we're going to be ending up talking so much about immigration over the months to come. William, what can the Democrats do to take advantage of the current Trump-Musk situation? Be vocal. Be present. And think more of what the country needs rather than what their individual self-advancement for arguably 2028 requires. And play offense, not defense. Alexander is asking, do you think Elon will do enough damage to make Trump's position untenable? I think that's unlikely. Post-truth populism in the US pushes the distrust that Christianity is under threat. Is this a worldwide trend or is the US unique in some ways? Christianity is under threat, and there are all kinds of ways in which people of this faith, not just of Muslim faith, but of this faith too, are discriminated against in society. However, that is quite different from various politicized construals of Christianity that are unlovely or malign and destructive. So you've got to make a distinction between unlovely conceptions of faith politically and more benign conceptions that might in fact be trodden upon now in an unfortunate way, but stopping treading on them is not something that's going to help irresponsible politics. The opposite. Monsieur Nothing, did Alasdair MacIntyre, one of the two greatest philosophers who died a few days ago, Alasdair was 96, did Alasdair MacIntyre say much before his death about Trump populism and post-truth? Alasdair had a view that is radically different to mine, which makes sense in his case, but it requires a very long story to explain. There is a very nice celebration obituary by Raymond Goyce, which I recommend you read. But Alasdair's very special skepticism about the liberal project And the possibility of rescuing positive traditions out of the Enlightenment was so deep that he really felt that it was very hard at the level of national politics to offer anything constructive at all. And so for 20 years, his position would have been that it's actually unethical to vote for either Democrats or Republicans. My position is Kamala Harris is a walking, talking calamity as a political project. But if I'm an American citizen, now it's not funny in my current case because I can't walk, but you crawl to vote for Kamala over Trump. That would have been my position very clearly, even though Kamala is such a disaster. Not personally a disaster as a political project, but you crawl to put in the vote. But it's very important to not sort of malign McIntyre's position. We need people in society with that position too. But it's a very big story to explain something that would look so ludicrous to us in this room. Why wouldn't he vote against Trump? Mike Brock is saying, I think Musk is actually quite legally exposed. His drug use is a valid reason to strip his security clearance. He must have that clearance to be the SpaceX CEO as a national defense contractor. And it's very difficult for Musk, between all of the drug stuff and all of the impulsivity stuff, and I actually think it's the latter triggering the former, not the other way around. It's very hard for Musk to act responsibly, even at the level of self-preservation at a time like this. He simply isn't in control of his brain enough to do that. So it's almost like a pot luck how he plays this. Zonko, hey Vlad, I love you. I love you too. But insisting that multiculturalism hasn't failed is akin to the pretense that Biden wasn't ill. When people are told to not believe their lying eyes, it undermines trust. I don't think you can say that because it's just too vague a claim, but that multiculturalism has failed. What has specifically failed is an immigration policy that is economics based and unconsultative with the majority feeling on the doorstep. That's failed. That's failed. Including, right, the failure to preserve in people a sense that their country is a kind of entity that is sufficiently impermeable for them to think that they can, sustainably and healthily belong to it as a political project. We've got too many people feeling like they're aliens in their own country. Some of that is nothing to do with immigration policy. Some of that is just a generic product of modernity. Nobody feels at home in the modern world. It's one of the things Alasdair MacIntyre finally would have said. So that's a big story too. But on immigration, we have done a lot to put ourselves into a position where we've generated, quite frankly, needless institutional distrust that's anyway going to lead to even more unlovely immigration policy in the future. So there's going to be no win here. It's not that you've pissed off the majority of your population, but put together a good policy. No. You effectively created a situation where you're at risk of passing policy making to unconstructive political parties like Reform in the UK. Do I think the midterms will be free and fair? This is never an either-or question. And you could sort of create a scale here, right? From votes being manipulated to just the presence of money in politics being an enormous corrupting effect. Or even more normatively ambitiously, the absence of a healthy space for citizens to talk to each other about policy, right? You might say that's also a cause of unfreedom. One of the things you've got to understand is that it's dangerous to detether just the election ritual from its wider context. An election is as much the vote as the conversation about the vote. So of course it's not going to be free and fair, and of course it is going to be free and fair. Are you going to put it on a scale? Well, it's going to be less free and less fair than some elections in European countries. It's going to be way more free and way more fair than any election in an authoritarian state. And if you're asking, is it likely that Trump will be vote-outable in 2028 with the right kind of political effort, the answer is still strongly yes. Anya saying that she's stopped with vlogs and started reading. It's very important to keep aligning to your nervous system, your engagement with analysis and information. And it's always wonderful when people sort of DJ that for themselves. Emmy, open arms for a hug back. Sarah, Australia calling Vlad. I'd like your views on the potential ramification of this geopolitical uncertainty for US allies. Australia finds itself in interesting waters these days, sending love. The key thing is you've got to keep the particular web of interdependence you have with the United States while slowly deconstructing it. At the same time, you've got to be very conservative about not enmeshing yourself with the United States deeper in ways you haven't yet. So you don't deepen your relationship with the United States, and the enmeshing you currently have, you little by little deconstruct, but very, very slowly and incrementally. That's the policy. But the historical understanding underneath it is, as Mark Carney says, rightly, I might do a chat about that separately actually, it's over, right? You've got to think that the default trajectory for the United States is to be an illiberal power, an illiberal global/regional power 10, 15 years from now. So it could end up better than that, but understand that that's the default expectation you should have. If you think that you are going to be able to wait Trump out, that's an elementary misunderstanding of the very forces that produce Trump. So unfortunately, for allies, this isn't a matter of an aberration. This is a matter of clarity that a certain kind of story that's 80 years old or so is now over. Is there any way Elon could sow distrust in Trump among his cultists? Yes, Otto is asking, sure. But at the same time, a lot of Trump support is actually based on not believing anything, not trusting anything in politics, except Trump. And that's to say that you're basically limitlessly pliant on issues, because even an issue like whether the sky is up or down is something you might be prepared to outsource to the only legitimate institution in town, which is the institution of the monarch, which is Donald Trump. What sort of developments could shift the United States to focus more on policy and ideas and less on owning opposition? Changes to political structure, a shocking event, a dynamic leader, all of that, obviously regulation of social media too, um, various kinds of rejuvenation of uh, local politics, but fundamentally, um, it requires a lot of the Democrats. It requires the Democrats to become self-transparent about their recent past and self-transparent about how they are a primary cause of Trumpism rather than a victim of it, which is currently their position. Windex is asking a generic question. Well, Vlad, despite the fact that Canada is mobilizing seemingly well against Trumpist America now, why are you still saying that it's sort of potentially open to being a victim of democratic decline? Because the forces at hand here are completely global. We're in a global wash. And it's not just a wash of ideas. Having a monarch is great. It's also a wash of social forces. The social forces that bring Trump to power in the United States are also active in Canada. The state of social media, untethering of social bonds, economic exclusion, right? And here the question is Mark Carney a kind of politician who is capable of challenging some of what I would diagnose to be wrong with technocratic centrism? And I'm skeptical about that. So you just can't be immune in virtue of being in the world. Um, Pinochet or Putin, what will be worst case scenario, the style of the authoritarianism? Dominic asks if authoritarianism arrives to the United States. Not Putin. There are several elements in Putinism that are never going to replicate in the West, in particular the messianic mystical element. So we're really talking about Viktor Orban as a good, realistic worst case scenario model. Hungary today is a realistic worst case scenario model for Western democracies for the next 5-10 years. Um, how would MAGA react? Daniel is asking if Trump flipped left wing. Trump is a bit left wing in rhetoric. He does have a little bit of a rhetoric of economic populism. The problem is it's never been reflected in the policy. So what would hold Trump back would be elites and institutions more than his own base if he flipped left on certain important policies and joined Bernie Sanders. Elizabeth is saying horizontal is good, brain is working fine. Let's see if we can get to an hour. Mike Brock is saying one thing I think is true is Musk's departure is the beginning of the end of the tech rights influence in the Trump circle. Vance is very nervous right now. Well, look forward to dialoguing with you about this, right? When my health is a little more stable. On one of your Substack lives, right? I'm not sure how Substack works. I am on Substack, by the way, because I wrote a tiny article on Substack about 10 years ago, but I'm planning to do more there. So find me there because I'm going to be more present there. Funnily enough, as my health deteriorated dramatically recently, it's probably going to make me a little bit more casual in making little appearances in different platforms. So if you're on Instagram, find me there and follow me there. I'll be doing little videos about culture and politics. And if you're on Substack, find me there. And of course, I remain on both X and Sky Blue. Sauna Yula is asking, is Snyder moving to Canada baying prematurely? Some interviews have implied it softly. I'm going to do a separate video about that, I promise, because a lot of people have asked, because I'm so passionate about the university and the academy that I'm going to have a lot to say about the three academics who moved. Toby is asking about Scandinavia and support for Ukraine and Ukraine war. Big question, right? The thing I would say is that the depth of support for Ukraine in the Scandinavian countries tendentiously is greater than in France, Germany, or the UK, or Spain. In the sense that in the UK, if you poll us, you're going to get a 90 to 95% pro-Ukrainian position, funnily enough. But it's a very weak pro-Ukrainian position. It's going to be something like, oh yeah, it's good if good stuff happens to Ukraine, rather than we've got to support Ukraine proactively. I just want to say I'm really proud of all of you, because this is a time when a lot of people are freaking out. It's a time when history is moving at an accelerated pace. And one thing that accelerates our trajectory leads to another that accelerates it even more. So this is a difficult time, and I'm very proud of all of us here for keeping our cool insofar as we're able to emotionally and epistemically. So big up to everyone. Yvonne, hi. Love back to you in Canada. Realize I haven't been to Canada since I first got ill with ME. I was last in Canada probably 25 years ago. I think I visited twice for a couple of weeks each time. Paoli is saying, if I'm feeling relaxed, I can always count on Vlad to freak me out. Yeah, I always balance freaking out and challenging, but also reassuring by giving context. And I think that one of the things I'm really blessed is this back and forth between us, whereby I genuinely intuitively sense that more people are reassured than freaked out. But it's also important to freak us out if we're too complacent. The Weasel is asking what Elon actually has on Trump. And I think some of the things that Elon says he can have confidence in, about Epstein, for instance, even without having any evidence that's unique to him. If one is saying you're welcome at the farm, I'll buy you a piggy. Thank you very much. I miss my two literal pigs, but I got a hospital pig. Got two hospital pigs. One got stolen with my belongings on my way back from the hospital. But the other is Pigton, the hospital, rather ugly, but sort of a cuddly hospital pig I got that did make it home. We're going to call it a day at the hour point. So let's see how we are. Amalfitano, thank you so much for helping us Keep our cool today. Yes, Pigton is here. Daniel, good night. Colonel is saying, this moment in history makes me think about how appalling the late 30s must have felt. Watching public international events. Sadly, we know how it ended. There is a whiff of the 30s right now, but we're not heading there. We're heading to a quite different place. And when it comes to the worst things that happened after the 1930s, we're not going to get there. We're going to just about keep our democracies, or in some cases lose them. And we're going to be in a difficult world with a legitimacy crisis in Western societies and an escalating climate crisis. But the odds that many people in the West can continue leading relatively leisurely lives for decades to come are quite high. Ivo is saying that I don't think that my second hospital pig is ugly. No, I don't think so either. It's just it's a well-mealed pig. It's had many meals. And what have you been doing to it? Yeah, I've been watching a 44-year-old philosopher lie in bed with a toy. You know, this is what I do in the information environment. You got a problem with that? No, I don't have any pets, but I used to own 2 pet pigs in Tonga. When I do a personal video sometime on chat, I'll show you a video of my pig Hillary, who was black with a big white dot on her back, and she thought I was her mum. Last question. Let's take it from Soren. How do you gather your resources to make your opinions? Enormously topic specific. Enormously topic specific. So for big picture views, like accounts of democratic decline, it's basically just me. A lot of what I say does overlap with a lot of what John Gray says or Michael Ignatieff says, but that's quite frankly because we're seeing the same stuff, even though we'll talk about it differently. I would say that it's a very individual diet rather than a publication-driven diet. So for each topic, I might trust 17 people. They're often institutionally affiliated, but they are rarely the institution as a whole, right? So there is not a single newspaper or website that I would go to and say, I trust this for that issue. It'd typically be more individual. It'd be people who have reacted adequately to events X, Y, Z, who then I go on to have a preliminary confidence in sort of reacting to events A, B, C. And it's based on a sort of a ruthless sense of people's strengths and people's weaknesses. Which means that I might even trust people who are a bit dodgy sometimes and unethical, but I know that on a particular dimension, they're not bullshitting. So I am planning a course or a workshop about something like negotiating the information environment for all of us. And so that's one of the questions we'll practically address there. The fact that we really live in a world in which even if we are very institutionally committed, effectively, our information and that sort of analytical diet, imaginative, creative diet, is often based on particular individuals, and how difficult that is to curate. Um, because when you move to a new topic you don't know anything about, how do you work out who to follow? It's very, very difficult indeed. Um, and what happens when you go wrong is that you follow a sort of ill-assorted porridge of people who have very different levels of quality and expertise. Hello, Rachel. Who have different levels of quality and expertise, but you somehow all put them in the same pot. So how do you not put people in the same pot, and how do you figure out what pot is who is in which pot? I'm beginning to lose the plot. So that's, I think, something we're definitely going to dive into more deeply. Now, you have helped me via the power of love survive a mostly horizontal 1 hour live. I'm very, very grateful. So we're going to be connected. See you soon on the chat channel again. And depending on what's happening with my health, I'm going to keep updating you. I work in very small windows. I'm in love with all the positive messaging I'm getting about how I seem better. At the same time, I often appear in the very best windows. So they're not representative of what's happening the rest of the time, to say the least. Much more choppy waters the rest of the time. I'm still waiting for treatment, for major treatment interventions, but there's still things on the cards. I need to be better for some of the treatment interventions. But depending on, lots of love your way to Mike, but depending on how that goes, what I'm going to do is I'm going to downscale the production quality of my main channel. And as long as I feel I have something really substantive to say, I'm going to make videos there if and when my health allows to. But for now, lots of love, and catch you later, beautiful community.